Some moments arrive without a sound, yet they shatter your world completely. For Leora Wyndham, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in student debt that moment, came on a Tuesday. It wasn't a gunshot or a siren. It was the quiet, agonizing silence at Table 7. There, the city's most powerful man, a billionaire who could buy countries, couldn't convince his own daughter to take a single bite of food. Leora watched the girl, a ghost in couture, wither under the weight of unspoken grief. In an act of career suicide, Leora did something no one else dared to. She broke the rules. She saw a person, not a problem. And by helping that fragile girl taste life again, Leora unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would by the next morning obliterate her old life forever. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater. Every night, the powerful and the privileged of New York City performed their lives under the warm glow of recessed lighting, their quiet confidence the main act. And Leora Wyndham was a stagehand perpetually in the wings. For 3 years, she had navigated this world of quiet luxury with a practiced, unobtrusive grace. She refilled water glasses so silently, they seemed to magically replenish themselves. She described the pan-seared scallops with a poet's precision, all while mentally calculating how many more tables she'd need to cover next month's rent on her shoebox apartment in Queens. Her real life, the one she dreamed of, was packed away in a worn portfolio under her bed. It was filled with sketches, lecture notes, and half-finished essays for a master's degree in art therapy she'd been forced to put on indefinite hold. She believed art could heal the wounds that words couldn't reach, a conviction that felt a million miles away as she balanced a tray of dirty plates, the scent of truffle oil clinging to her uniform. Tonight, however, the theatre had a different kind of drama. Table 7, the best seat in the house, with its panoramic view of the glittering city, was occupied by Gideon Forrester and his daughter Cassandra. Gideon Forrester wasn't just wealthy, he was a force of nature. A tech titan whose software ran the logistical backbone of global trade, he had a face that was all sharp angles and piercing intelligence, a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. But at this table he was powerless. His daughter Cassandra was perhaps 17, but looked closer to 12. She was a sketch of a girl, her expensive silk dress hanging on a frame of jutting bones. Her face, beautiful in its fine structure, was a pale, emotionless mask. Her eyes, a deep, stormy grey, were fixed on a point, somewhere beyond the city lights, utterly vacant. In front of her sat a bowl of wild mushroom, consommé, a dish so light and delicate it was barely more than flavoured air. It was untouched. The steam had long since vanished. Leora had been watching them for the better part of an hour. It was a familiar, painful dance. Mr. Forrester would lean forward, his voice a low, urgent murmur. Cassandra would not respond. He would gesture to the food, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. She would remain unnervingly still, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. The other staff gave the table a wide berth, their professional smiles faltering in the face of such raw, silent misery. "It's the Forrester girl," whispered a fellow waiter, a jaded veteran named Ben, as he polished cutlery at the service station. "Tragic story. The mother died a couple of years back. The girl's been wasting away ever since. They say he's hired every top doctor in the country. Nothing works." Leora's heart ached. She wasn't just seeing a rich girl with an eating disorder. She was seeing a person trapped in a silent scream. In her art therapy studies, she'd learned about the psychology of anorexia. It was rarely about vanity. It was about control. It was about punishing the self when you couldn't punish the world. It was a slow, methodical suicide disguised as discipline. Mr. Forrester caught her eye, a silent plea for the check. Defeat was etched into every line on his face. He was ready to surrender for the night. Leora nodded, but as she turned to the point-of-sale system, something inside her snapped. It was the sight of Cassandra's hand resting near her water glass. It was so thin, the skin translucent over the delicate bones. It was a hand that should have been holding a paintbrush or a tennis racket or the hand of a first love. Instead, it was a symbol of her own disappearing act. Leora printed the check, but she didn't walk toward the table with it. She walked to the kitchen. "Leo," she said to the gruff but brilliant head chef, "give me 1 raspberry, the best one you have, and a small, clean plate." Leo grunted, annoyed at the odd request during the dinner rush, but he respected Leora. He wordlessly handed her a single, perfect raspberry, a tiny jewel of deep crimson, and a small porcelain saucer. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Robert, would fire her on the spot for this. You do not engage with the guests. You do not deviate from the script, especially not with a guest like Gideon Forrester. She took a deep breath, placed the single raspberry on the plate, and walked toward table 7. Ben's eyes widened in alarm. She ignored him. She approached the table not as a waitress, but as Leora. She didn't look at Mr. Forrester. She knelt slightly, bringing herself to eye level with his daughter. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, so it wouldn't carry. "Hi, Cassandra," she said. For the first time all evening, the girl's vacant gaze flickered. Her eyes met Leora's. There was a spark of surprise in their depths. Leora placed the small saucer on the table next to the untouched soup. "I know you're not hungry," she said gently, "and that's okay. I'm not bringing you food." Gideon Forrester stiffened, about to intervene, but something in Leora's calm demeanor stopped him. "When I was a little girl," Leora continued, her eyes locked with Cassandra's, "my grandmother told me that raspberries were a secret. She said they weren't food. They were memories of sunshine waiting to be unlocked. Just a tiny burst of warmth on a cold day." She didn't push. She didn't plead. She simply shared a small personal truth. She looked at the single perfect berry. It's not about eating. It's just remembering what sunshine tastes like. No pressure. I'll take it away in a minute. She stood up, gave a small, respectful nod to Mr. Forrester, and walked away, her entire body trembling. She didn't look back. She went to the service station, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the water pitcher. She was sure she was fired. She had just committed the greatest sin in the world of fine dining. She had gotten personal. She had treated a billionaire's anorexic daughter like a human being. The seconds after Leora walked away from table 7 stretched into an eternity. She stood with her back to them, pretending to organize salt shakers, her ears straining against the ambient hum of the restaurant. She could feel the weight of every stare her manager Robert's hot with fury. Ben's a mix of pity and disbelief, and Gideon Forrester's, which she could only imagine, was one of cold, controlled rage. She had overstepped a sacred boundary. She prepared herself for the tap on the shoulder, the curt "Leora, my office," that would signal the end of her job, but it didn't come. Instead, a different sound cut through the clatter and conversation. It was a tiny sound, almost imperceptible, but to Leora, it was as loud as a thunderclap. It was the faint, delicate clink of a silver spoon against a porcelain bowl. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Gideon Forrester was frozen, his hands flat on the table, his gaze fixed on his daughter. And Cassandra. Cassandra was no longer staring into the void. Her focus was entirely on the bowl of consommé in front of her. Her hand, which had been clenched in a fist of defiance, was now holding the spoon. It trembled a tiny earthquake of indecision, but it was moving. Slowly, deliberately, she dipped the spoon into the golden-brown liquid. She raised it halfway to her lips and paused, her jaw tight, a war raging in her stormy eyes. Leora held her breath. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. It was a battle between the disease that whispered poison in her ear and the flicker of life that had just been rekindled. Then she opened her mouth and took a sip. It was the smallest of victories, a single spoonful of soup. But in the context of Cassandra Forrester's life, it was a monumental triumph. Her eyes closed for a moment, and a single tear traced a path down her pale cheek, dropping silently onto the white tablecloth. She placed the spoon down gently. She didn't take another bite, but she had taken one. Then she did something even more shocking. Her gaze shifted to the small saucer Leora had left. She reached out a slender, trembling finger and picked up the single raspberry. She didn't eat it. She simply held it, rolling it between her thumb and forefinger, her expression unreadable. She looked up her eyes, scanning the room until they found Leora. Their gazes locked across the restaurant floor. In Cassandra's eyes for the first time, Leora didn't see emptiness. She saw a question, a flicker of hope, a silent, desperate thank you. Gideon Forrester finally moved. He signaled to Leora, his hand steady, but his expression one of profound shock. Leora walked back to the table, her legs feeling like jelly. "We'll take the check now," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. He didn't look at her. His attention was still entirely on his daughter, who was now carefully placing the raspberry back on the saucer. Leora processed the payment in a daze. As she handed the credit card and receipt back to Mr. Forrester, his fingers brushed against hers. He looked up, and for the first time, Leora saw the man behind the myth. The fear and exhaustion in his eyes were so profound they were almost suffocating. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "It's Leora. Leora Wyndham." He nodded, slowly memorizing it. "Thank you, Leora Wyndham." He said nothing else. He helped Cassandra to her feet, his hand gently on her back, and guided her out of the restaurant. They left the untouched raspberry on the table. The moment they were gone, her manager Robert descended upon her like a hawk. "Wyndham! What in God's name was that?" He hissed, his face red with anger. "You are paid to serve food, not to play therapist to the city's elite. You're lucky he didn't have you thrown out. Do you have any idea who that was?" "Yes, Robert, I do," Leora said, her voice surprisingly steady. "He was a father, and she was his daughter, and she was hurting. This isn't a charity ward. This is a $200 a plate establishment." He fumed. "One more stunt like that and you're gone. Do you understand me? Gone." Leora just nodded, too emotionally drained to argue. She spent the rest of the night on autopilot, clearing tables, taking orders and smiling at people who had no idea that a life-or-death battle had just been waged and won over a bowl of soup. When her shift finally ended after 1 a.m., she felt hollowed out. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion and the lingering certainty that she had just torpedoed her own employment. She took the subway back to Queens, the train rattling through the dark tunnels of the city. As she walked the few blocks to her building, the city felt different, lonelier. She had connected for a brief moment with another soul, in a way that felt more real than anything she'd done in years. And now it was over. She unlocked the 3 deadbolts on her apartment door and stepped inside. It was small and cluttered with books she couldn't afford, and canvases she didn't have time to paint on. She dropped her keys in a bowl, her tips a meager $73 on the counter. She was tired, broke, and probably jobless. But as she replayed the image of Cassandra's eyes meeting hers, a small, defiant smile touched her lips. She wouldn't have done it any differently. For one moment, she hadn't been a waitress. She had been an art therapist, and she had, in her own small way, created a masterpiece, a flicker of hope. The next morning, Leora woke to the grating sound of her alarm, feeling the physical and emotional hangover from the previous night. The brief moment of defiant satisfaction had evaporated in the harsh light of day, replaced by the cold, hard anxiety of reality. She had a mountain of debt rent was due in a week, and she had almost certainly provoked her boss into firing her. Her career in art therapy felt less like a distant dream and more like a cruel joke. She was pulling on her drab work uniform when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed on her apartment door. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor or the hurried thud of a delivery person. This was something else. Cautiously, she peered through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit, peeling paint hallway of her building was a man who was so out of place he might as well have been from another planet. He was tall, impeccably dressed, in a dark, tailored suit with an earpiece discreetly curled into one ear. He radiated an aura of quiet, formidable professionalism. He looked like he belonged on the security detail of a head of state, not outside a fourth-floor walk-up in Queens. Her heart leapt into her throat. Was she being evicted? Was this some bizarre collections agent? She opened the door a crack, the safety chain still engaged. "Leora Wyndham?" the man asked. His voice was a calm, low baritone. "Yes." "My name is Patrick Davis. I'm the head of personal security for Mr. Gideon Forrester. He has requested a meeting with you. A car is waiting downstairs." Leora stared at him, dumbfounded. The words didn't compute. A car. A meeting. Gideon Forrester. She thought she was in trouble that he was sending his head of security to formally complain to her manager, or worse, to threaten her with some kind of legal action for harassing his daughter. A meeting about what? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Forrester prefers to discuss the matter in person. He assures you it is to your benefit. Mr. Davis said, his expression unreadable. He's aware you have a shift this morning. He has already spoken with your manager. You have the day off. The finality of it sent a chill down her spine. He'd called her boss. This was serious. With a sense of dazed inevitability, she unhooked the chain and told the man she needed 5 minutes. She quickly changed out of her uniform into the nicest clothes she owned. A simple black blouse and grey trousers ran a brush through her hair and grabbed her purse, her mind racing. The car waiting downstairs was a black, gleaming Maybach, its silent, imposing presence drawing curious stares from her neighbours. The interior was a cocoon of plush leather and polished wood, utterly silent as it glided through the noisy city streets. In 20 minutes, she had been transported from her world of grit and struggle into the very heart of corporate power. The Forrester Corporation headquarters was a shard of glass and steel that pierced the Manhattan skyline. Mr. Davis escorted her through a cavernous marble-lined lobby, past a security checkpoint that rivaled an airport's, and into a private elevator that shot upwards with breathtaking speed. The doors opened directly into Gideon Forrester's office. It was less an office, and more a kingdom. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the city sprawling below. The furniture was sparse and elegant, the art on the walls was museum quality, and the silence was absolute. Gideon Forrester stood looking out one of the windows, his back to her. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored grey suit, and he looked every bit the master of this universe. "Miss Wyndham," he said, turning around. His eyes were intense, searching. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't feel I had much of a choice," Leora replied, her voice coming out stronger than she expected. A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. Direct. I appreciate that. Please sit. She sat on a leather chair that was probably worth more than everything she owned. He remained standing, a deliberate power move. Last night, he began getting straight to the point. You did something that a team of the world's most renowned psychiatrists, nutritionists, and behavioral therapists have failed to do for the past 2 years. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You got my daughter to eat. Leora swallowed. It was just 1 spoonful of soup. It was everything. He corrected her, his voice raw with an emotion he quickly suppressed. It was a crack in the wall. After we left your restaurant, she spoke to me. Not much, just a few words. It was the first real conversation we've had in 6 months. She asked about your grandmother. Leora was speechless. I had Mr. Davis run a background check on you last night. He continued, his tone shifting back to business. Leora Wyndham, age 24. Parents were Ukrainian immigrants. Top of your class in psychology at NYU. Accepted into the master's program for art therapy before deferring due to financial constraints. Currently working 60 hours a week at the Gilded Sparrow to pay off student loans. You have no criminal record, and by all accounts, you are reliable, intelligent, and empathetic. He had laid her entire life out on the table in a few brisk sentences. It was terrifying and strangely validating. I have a proposition for you, Miss Wyndham, he said, finally moving to sit in the chair opposite her. I want to hire you. Hire me to do what wait tables at your home? No, he said, leaning forward, his eyes boring into hers. I want you to be Cassandra's companion. I want you to do whatever it is you did last night. Talk to her. Connect with her. I don't care about methods or medical orthodoxy anymore. I've spent millions on the best doctors in the world. They come with their charts and their theories, and they look at my daughter like she's a broken machine. You looked at her like she was a person. He named a salary that made Leora's head spin. It was more than she would make in 10 years at the restaurant. Furthermore, he added, I will pay off your entire student debt. Immediately. And I will fund the full tuition for your master's degree, which you will complete with private tutors at your convenience. You would live in our home. You would have a generous expense account. Your only job, your only focus would be Cassandra. Leora's mind was a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. This was a life raft. No, this was a luxury yacht appearing out of nowhere to rescue her from the ocean of debt she was drowning in. It was everything she had ever wanted. A chance to use her passion, to pursue her education, to be free from the crushing weight of financial worry. But there was a catch. There was always a catch. What about her doctors? Leora asked, finding her voice. She must have a team. Forrester's expression hardened. She does. Dr. Roland Cole leads her care. He's considered the best in his field. He will, I assure you, be an obstacle. He believes in a rigid clinical approach. He will see you as an unqualified sentimental interloper. You will report directly to me, and only to me. Your results will speak for you. He was offering her a golden ticket, but it was a ticket into a war zone, a sterile, quiet war zone in a penthouse apartment, fought over the soul of a sad, fragile girl. There is, of course, a non-disclosure agreement of unparalleled scope and severity, he concluded, gesturing to a thick document on the desk. You will not speak of my family, my daughter, or anything you see or hear within my home to anyone, ever. The penalty for violation is absolute. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. This is a one-time offer, Miss Wyndham. You can say no, and my driver will take you back to your life, along with a check for $50,000 for your kindness last night, or you can say yes, and your old life ends right now. Leora looked out the window at the vast, sprawling city below. Her tiny apartment, her exhausting job, her deferred dreams. It all seemed so small and distant from up here. She thought of Cassandra's eyes, the flicker of life she had seen in them. This wasn't just about the money or the degree. It was a chance to do the one thing she was born to do, to heal. She met Gideon Forrester's gaze, her decision made. "I say yes." Saying yes was like stepping through a portal. Within hours, Leora's old life was systematically dismantled and packed away. A discreet, personal logistics team dispatched by Mr. Davis arrived at her Queen's apartment. They packed her books, her clothes, and her precious art supplies with silent, unnerving efficiency. Leora simply stood by, holding a box with her few personal keepsakes, feeling like a ghost in her own life. By late afternoon, she was being escorted into the private elevator of the Forrester residence, a triplex penthouse on Central Park West that made Gideon's office look like a waiting room. The apartment was an architectural marvel of glass, steel, and stark white marble. It was breathtakingly beautiful and profoundly cold. Priceless modern art hung on the walls, but it felt curated for a gallery, not a home. The air was still and quiet, scrubbed of any scent of life, no smell of cooking, no hint of perfume. It was less a home and more a luxurious, hermetically sealed containment facility. Her room, as sweet really was, larger than her entire old apartment, with a king-sized bed, a walk-in closet, and a bathroom clad in Italian marble. A window looked out over the endless green expanse of Central Park. It was a gilded cage, and she had just been handed the key. She met Cassandra again that evening. The girl was in a sitting room, curled up on a vast white sofa, reading a book. She looked up as Leora entered, her grey eyes showing a flicker of recognition, but no warmth. The hope Leora had seen in the restaurant was gone buried again under layers of practiced indifference. "Hello, Cassandra," Leora said softly. "They call me Cassie," the girl replied, her voice a near whisper. She immediately looked back down at her book, a clear dismissal. An awkward silence fell between them. This was going to be much harder than Leora had imagined. The breakthrough in the restaurant had been a fluke, a moment of surprise. Here on Cassie's home turf, the walls were back up thicker and higher than ever. The true challenge, however, manifested in the form of a man with a placid smile and cold, analytical eyes, Dr. Roland Cole. He found Leora in the kitchen the next morning as she was trying to figure out how the impossibly complex coffee machine worked. "Ah, you must be the miracle worker," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. He was handsome in a severe academic way, dressed in a tweed jacket that seemed at odds with the apartment's sterile modernism. "I'm Leora Wyndham," she said, extending a hand. He ignored it instead, picking up an apple from a fruit bowl and polishing it on his jacket. "Mr. Forrester has an unfortunate tendency toward grand romantic gestures. I, on the other hand, deal in science, pathophysiology, neurochemistry, not grandmother's stories about raspberries." The dismissiveness in his tone was a slap in the face. "Cassandra's condition is a complex, psychobiological matrix," he continued, taking a loud bite of the apple. "It is not something to be solved by amateur theatrics. My program is based on strict caloric intake, behavioral modification, and intensive psychotherapy. Your presence here, Miss Wyndham, is an unwelcome variable. It gives the patient a false sense of hope and undermines the established therapeutic alliance. The established therapeutic alliance that has her starving to death." Leora countered, her temper flaring. Dr. Cole's smile tightened. Recovery is not a linear process. There are setbacks. We are making progress. I saw a girl who has given up, Leora stated plainly. Progress looks a lot like hope to me. Be very careful, he warned, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You are a waitress, playing a very dangerous game in a world you do not understand. Stick to holding her hand and reading her stories. Leave the medicine to the professionals, for her sake. He dropped the half-eaten apple into the compost bin and walked away, leaving Leora fuming. The battle lines were drawn. The days that followed were a grueling exercise in patience. Leora tried everything. She talked about art, about books, about the city. Cassie responded in monosyllables, her eyes always distant. Every meal was a painful ordeal, overseen by a nutritionist who reported to Dr. Cole. Tiny portions of nutritionally dense food were presented, and mostly refused. Dr. Cole would then document the refusal as oppositional defiance, another data point in his clinical assessment. Leora realized she couldn't win on their turf. The dining room, the sitting room, these were all part of the sterile environment Dr. Cole controlled. She needed a new space, a space that was hers. She found it in a forgotten room at the top of the penthouse stairs. It was a sunroom filled with dusty, unused furniture and covered in drop cloths, but it had magnificent light and a stunning view. With Mr. Forrester's permission, she had the room cleared out. She brought in her own supplies, giant pads of paper, canvases, pots of clay charcoal, and every color of paint imaginable. She didn't ask Cassie to join her. She just started working. She sketched the view, the clouds, the birds. She worked with clay, her hands covered in the messy, earthy substance. She made it her sanctuary. For 3 days, Cassie ignored the room. On the 4th day, as Leora was working with a piece of charcoal, she saw a shadow in the doorway. Cassie was standing there, watching her arms wrapped around her skeletal frame. She didn't say a word. She just watched Leora's hand move across the paper, the black dust creating a storm cloud, dark and turbulent. It's angry, Cassie whispered so quietly, Leora almost missed it. Leora didn't look up from her drawing. Yes, she said. I think it is. Cassie took a hesitant step into the room. It was the first voluntary move Leora had seen her make toward anything other than her bedroom. It wasn't a spoonful of soup, but it was something. It was a choice. And in a life that had been stripped of all choices, it was everything. The art room became their neutral ground, a sanctuary from the clinical observation and suffocating silence of the rest of the penthouse. For the first week, Cassie would only watch from the doorway. Then she started sitting in a chair in the corner. Leora never pushed. She just worked sometimes, talking about her day, about the colors she was mixing, about a funny dog she saw in the park. She was creating a space of low expectation, a place where Cassie could simply be without the pressure to perform, to talk, or to eat. The breakthrough came with a lump of grey clay. Leora had left several on the table. One afternoon, while Leora was sketching, she noticed Cassie's gaze fixed on the clay. Her fingers twitched. It's just earth and water, Leora said softly, not looking at her. It doesn't judge. You can do anything you want with it. Squeeze it, pound it, make something beautiful, or make something ugly and smash it. It doesn't care. After a long, tense silence, Cassie slowly walked to the table. She picked up a piece of clay. Her touch was hesitant at first, then firmer. She began to work it in her hands, her movements becoming more confident. For the next hour she was completely absorbed, her brow furrowed in concentration. The blank mask she usually wore was gone, replaced by an expression of intense focus. Leora watched, mesmerized. This was the core of art therapy, externalizing the internal, giving form to feelings that had no words. Cassie molded the clay into a small, intricate shape. It was a bird, a songbird, with its head tilted back, its beak open in a silent song. It was exquisitely detailed, heartbreakingly fragile. "It's beautiful, Cassie," Leora said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Cassie looked at the clay bird in her hand, and her face crumpled. A dry, shuddering sob escaped her lips. "It can't sing," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It wants to, but it can't." She squeezed her hand, and the beautiful bird was gone, crushed back into a shapeless lump of grey clay. The violence of the act was shocking, but Leora understood. Cassie wasn't destroying the bird. She was describing her own existence. This single act opened a door. Cassie started spending more time in the art room, working with clay and charcoal. She rarely spoke about her creations, but they were a language all their own. She drew tangled, thorny vines, cages, and empty rooms. It was a landscape of her own despair, and for the first time she was letting someone else see it. Their progress, however small, did not go unnoticed. Dr. Cole saw it as a threat. He would often observe their sessions, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, his presence casting a clinical chill over the room. "Catharsis is not a cure, Miss Wyndham," he'd say later in the hallway. "Allowing her to wallow in these morbid expressions is counterproductive. She needs structure, not finger painting." But Gideon Forrester saw it differently. He saw his daughter voluntarily leaving her room. He heard snippets of conversation from the art room. For the first time in 2 years, there was a glimmer of light. He told Leora to ignore Dr. Cole and continue. One rainy afternoon, as they sat in the art room, the mood was particularly somber. Cassie was listless, staring out at the rain-streaked window. Leora, sensing a deep well of sadness, decided to take a gentle risk. "Cassie," she began carefully, "the raspberry I gave you at the restaurant. I told you it reminded me of my grandmother. Do you have a memory like that? A taste or a smell that reminds you of a happy time?" Cassie was silent for a long time. Leora thought she wouldn't answer. "Peaches," she finally whispered. "My mother. She loved white peaches in the summer. We had a tree at our old house. She used to make peach bellinis for her parties. She'd give me the leftover puree on a spoon. It tasted like sunshine." Her voice trailed off, lost in the memory. It was the most she had ever shared about her mother. Leora knew she was approaching the heart of the trauma. "She sounds wonderful," Leora prompted gently. Cassie's expression instantly darkened. "She was perfect." She said the word, coming out sharp and bitter. Everything had to be perfect. The house, the parties, me. She would measure my food to make sure I was healthy, to make sure I would look good in the dresses she picked out. The confession hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The anorexia hadn't just begun after her mother's death. Its seeds were planted long before by the very person Cassie was now grieving. "That must have been so hard," Leora said, her heart breaking for the little girl who was taught that love was conditional on perfection. "I just wanted her to be happy," Cassie said, tears welling in her eyes. "But I was never good enough." Later that week, another memory surfaced, this one more jagged and frightening. A delivery had arrived, and a careless worker had dropped a box, resulting in the sound of shattering glass from downstairs. Cassie flinched violently, dropping the charcoal she was holding. Her face went deathly pale. "What is it, Cassie?" Leora asked, alarmed. "The music," Cassie whispered, her eyes wide with a terror that was not in the present. The music stopped. "What music?" "The music box." She stammered, her breathing growing short and ragged. Her favorite. The porcelain birds. It was on the floor. It was broken. He was yelling. Who was yelling? Cassie. "Daddy!" she choked out. He was yelling at her. The night of the storm. The night. She couldn't finish the sentence. She began to hyperventilate, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold her splintering psyche together. Leora's blood ran cold. The official story, the one in the papers, was that Cassandra's mother, Sophia Forrester, had lost control of her car on a winding road during a bad storm. A tragic accident. But Cassie's fragmented memory, the yelling, the broken music box, painted a different picture. It suggested a fight, a terrible one, right before her mother had gotten into that car. Leora finally understood. The anorexia wasn't just about controlling her body or punishing herself for not being perfect enough for her mother. It was bigger and darker. Cassie was starving herself because she was choking on a secret. She was holding on to a truth so terrible she couldn't speak. It couldn't process it, couldn't swallow it. The night her mother died wasn't just a tragic accident. Something had happened in that house. And Gideon Forrester was there. Knowing what she now knew, Leora felt a tremor of fear. She wasn't just a companion anymore. She was the keeper of a secret that had the power to detonate the entire Forrester family. She looked at Gideon, a man of immense power and control, and saw him through new eyes. She saw a man who might be responsible directly or indirectly for the trauma that was killing his own daughter. For 2 days, she wrestled with what to do. Going to Dr. Cole was out of the question. He would use it as ammunition to have her thrown out, twisting it into a story of her manipulating a vulnerable patient. She had to go directly to the source. She had to confront Gideon. She chose her moment carefully. It was late after 10 p.m. She knew he would be in his study, a sanctuary of dark wood leather-bound books and glowing monitors displaying the real-time pulse of the global market. She knocked on the heavy oak door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Enter!" His voice boomed. He was sitting behind a massive desk, bathed in the cool light of a computer screen. He looked tired. "Leora," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Is something wrong with Cassie?" "She's sleeping," Leora said, closing the door behind her, the soft click sealing them in. "This is about Cassie, but it's also about you." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. The titan of industry was back, the concerned father receding. "Go on." "We've been talking in our sessions." Leora began, her voice shaking slightly, despite her resolve. "About her mother." Gideon's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "That's to be expected. Grief is a primary component of her condition." "This isn't just grief, Mr. Forrester," Leora said, taking a step closer to the desk. "This is trauma. Cassie has memories of the night her mother died. Memories of a fight, of you yelling, of a broken music box." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Gideon Forrester's face became a mask of stone, but his eyes, his very blue eyes, betrayed a flicker of raw panic. He had not expected this. He had thought that secret was buried forever. "Miss Wyndham," he said, his voice dangerously low and cold. "You are a companion. You are not a psychiatrist. You are wildly, irresponsibly out of your depth. You are putting fantasies into my daughter's head." "Am I?" Leora challenged her fear, being burned away by a surge of protective anger for Cassie. She's been starving herself for 2 years because she's carrying a burden she's too terrified to speak about. She thinks her mother's death is her fault. Or worse, she thinks it's yours and she can't bear that truth. The disease isn't the problem, Mr. Forrester. It's a symptom. The secret is the disease. "There is no secret," he snarled, rising from his chair. He was a tall man, and he used his height to intimidate, to loom over her. My wife died in a tragic accident. End of story. Then why did Cassie hear you screaming at her right before she left? Leora shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. Why does she remember her favorite porcelain music box shattered on the floor? What happened in this house that night? Gideon stared at her, his composure finally cracking. The carefully constructed dam of control he had built around himself for 2 years began to groan under the pressure. He ran a hand over his face, and when he looked at her again, the anger was gone, replaced by a deep, cavernous despair. The billionaire vanished, and all that was left was a broken man. He walked over to the vast window, looking down at the river of lights that was the city. His back was to her. When he finally spoke, his voice thick with unshed tears. She was a brilliant woman. He began, his voice raspy, vibrant, full of life. But she was also fragile. The perfection you heard about it wasn't for others. It was for her. It was the only way she knew how to keep the darkness at bay. Her depression. He turned to face Leora, his eyes haunted. That night, we had been arguing for weeks. I was consumed with a corporate merger. I was working constantly. I was irritable. I wasn't present. She felt abandoned. She had been drinking. The party she'd planned had been a success, but she felt it was a failure. She felt she was a failure. He gestured to a spot on the floor. The music box was a gift from me from our first anniversary. She picked it up and hurled it at the wall. She said I was as cold and empty as the porcelain, that I cared more about my algorithms than my own family. He paused, swallowing hard. And I said something terrible, something unforgivable. I told her she was a black hole of need, that nothing I ever did would be enough to fill her emptiness. I told her to just go. A tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a hurt so profound, and she just walked out. I heard the front door. I heard the car start. It was storming. I almost went after her. But my pride, my anger, I just stood there. I let her go. My last words to my wife were cruel and filled with hate. He sank into his chair, a titan brought to his knees by the weight of his own guilt. "Cassie," he whispered. Her room was right at the top of the stairs. She must have heard it all. The shouting, the crash of the music box. She must have heard the car drive away. The horrible truth clicked into place for Leora. Cassie didn't just feel responsible for not being perfect enough. She had heard the fight. She knew her father had, in a way, sent her mother out into the storm to die. She was carrying not just her own grief, but his guilt, a guilt so immense it was literally consuming her. She was starving to atone for her mother's unhappiness, for her father's anger, for her own inability to stop any of it. She was trying to disappear so she wouldn't have to carry the secret anymore. "She needs to hear this from you," Leora said, her voice soft but firm. "She needs to know the truth. Not the story in the papers, but your truth. The broken, ugly human truth. It's the only thing that will set her free." Gideon Forrester, the man who controlled empires, looked up at Leora, the waitress from Queens, with an expression of complete and utter surrender. "How?" he asked, his voice a broken plea. "How do I even begin?" The conversation that followed was the hardest and most important of Gideon Forrester's life. Guided by Leora, he didn't try to orchestrate it in his study or a formal sitting room. They went to the one place Cassie felt safe, the art room. Cassie was sitting by the window sketching the rainy city lights when her father walked in. She tensed immediately, her defenses flying up. But Gideon didn't loom. He didn't command. He pulled up a simple wooden stool, the kind Leora used, and sat near her, making himself smaller, more approachable. Leora stood quietly by the door, ready to intervene, but praying she wouldn't have to. "Cassie," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I need to talk to you about the night your mother died." Cassie flinched, her charcoal stick frozen over the page. "There's something you need to know." He continued, his eyes pleading with his daughter to listen. "Something I should have told you 2 years ago. I was too ashamed, too guilty. What happened was not your fault, and it wasn't just an accident. It was my fault." Slowly, painfully, he told her everything. He told her about the argument, about the terrible things he'd said, about his pride and his regret. He didn't spare himself. He painted himself not as a victim, but as a flawed, angry husband who failed his wife in her moment of greatest need. He confessed that his silence over the past 2 years wasn't to protect her, but to protect himself from the shame. "I let her walk out that door, Cassie." He finished, his voice breaking completely. "And I have regretted it every second of every day since. The reason I couldn't talk about her, the reason I buried myself in work, was because I couldn't face what I had done. And in my cowardice, I let you carry that burden alone. I am so sorry." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just offered the truth. For a long time, Cassie didn't move. She just sat there, the charcoal held loosely in her fingers. Then she put it down. She turned to face her father, and for the first time in years, she truly looked at him. She saw not the powerful CEO or the demanding father, but a man drowning in his own grief. Her grey eyes, so often stormy or vacant, were now clear and filled with tears. "I heard you," she whispered. "I was at the top of the stairs. I heard the music box break. I thought if I had been better, if I had been perfect, you wouldn't have fought." "Oh, sweetheart, no," Gideon sobbed, reaching out and taking his daughter's thin hand. "No, that was never on you. That was about me and your mother, and sicknesses we didn't know how to heal. It was never ever about you." The dam of unspoken words and buried pain finally broke. Father and daughter wept together, clinging to one another amidst the canvases and lumps of clay, the raw materials of emotion. They weren't a billionaire and his heir. They were just a father and daughter finally grieving together. The change in the days that followed was not instantaneous or magical, but it was profound. The oppressive silence in the penthouse was replaced by tentative conversations. Cassie started joining her father for meals. She didn't always eat much, but she sat with him and they talked. They talked about her mother, the good and the bad, the perfect hostess and the sad woman. They were finally remembering the whole person, not just the myth or the ghost. Dr. Roland Cole was dismissed. He left with a final condescending warning to Gideon that he was making a grave mistake, abandoning a proven clinical path for sentimental folk remedies. Gideon simply thanked him for his time and had Mr. Davis show him the door. A month later, Leora was sitting with Cassie in the art room. Cassie was working on a new sculpture. It was another bird, but this one was different. Its wings were spread, its head was lifted, and it looked like it was in the middle of taking flight. There was a lightness to it, a sense of hope. Cassie was still painfully thin, but there was a new light in her eyes, a color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. The road ahead was long, but for the first time she was on it. That evening, Gideon Forrester called Leora into his study again. "My daughter is healing," he said, his voice filled with a gratitude so deep it was humbling. "You didn't just save her life, Leora. You gave my family back its soul. The money, the tuition, it's an insultingly small token for what you've done." He slid a thick portfolio across the desk. "This is not a paycheck. It's a proposal." Leora opened it. Inside were incorporation documents, architectural plans, and a mission statement. The title on the first page read, "The Wyndham Forrester Foundation for Creative Healing." "I am liquidating a significant portion of my shares in my primary company," Gideon explained. "We are going to create a new foundation, a place where art therapy is not an alternative treatment, but a primary one. We will build a state-of-the-art facility. We will fund research. We will offer scholarships to students like you and provide services to families who could never afford them. And you, Leora, will run it. You will build your dream not just for yourself, but for thousands of others." Leora stared at the documents, her vision blurring with tears. This was beyond anything she could have ever imagined. Her life hadn't just been changed. It had been given a profound, world-altering purpose. She had walked into the Gilded Sparrow as a waitress, hoping to make enough in tips to cover her rent. She was now being asked to help heal the world. She thought of the single raspberry, that tiny seed of hope she had offered on a whim. She had wanted to help one girl remember what sunshine tasted like, and now she was being given a chance to build an entire garden. Leora's story is a powerful reminder that the greatest changes often begin with the smallest, most courageous acts of empathy. She wasn't a doctor or a renowned therapist. She was a waitress who chose to see a person instead of a problem. By stepping outside the script of her life, she didn't just save a girl who had been written off as a lost cause. She healed a broken family and in the process discovered her own true purpose. Her journey from serving tables to leading a multi-million-dollar foundation proves that our true value isn't in the job we have, but in the compassion we choose to show. It's a testament to the idea that one moment of genuine human connection can be more powerful than all the money and medicine in the world. If this story resonated with you and reminded you of the power of kindness, please take a moment to show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who might need to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and uplift. What small act of kindness have you witnessed that changed everything? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.